Welcome everybody. My name is Lucia Heath. I'm CEO of Women for Election. Fantastic to have you here tonight. I would like to start actually by acknowledging that I am coming to you from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to leaders past, present and emerging. I would also like to say that sovereignty of this land was never ceded, and it's my belief that until we reach a treaty with First Nations people, our ability to move forward together is compromised. Please feel free in the chat to note where you are joining us from this evening. So very, very big welcome to Cathy McGowan. Hi, Cathy. Coming to us from Victoria, from the Indigo Valley, actually. And it's been a big day for anyone following the US election. And if you are like, I see, if you're like me, you probably want to talk about it a lot tonight, later tonight, first thing tomorrow morning. And I think we're going to touch on it tonight as well, but we're going to leave it towards the end of this session. So Ruth and I are going to have involved in some Q&A, and then we're going to throw it to questions from you. But firstly, let me introduce Cathy and the fabulous book that she has released. Cathy Goes to Canberra. Cathy, thank you for joining us. A rural woman that's run her own business. There we go. Before. There's a lot of stuff that I want to touch on with you tonight, Cathy. The main things being your journey into politics that's led to you writing this book, but also how vocal you've been about wanting to see more women in those chambers and a broader lived experience as well. So besides having the auspicious background of being Ruth McGowan's sister, who is our training partner, hi Ruth. You've had a varied career, and I want to start with going back to, I guess, that period before you won, when we saw Voices for Indi form a community movement, and Voices for Indi has inspired other groups to form around the country as well. Voices for Warringah, Voices for Mackellar. More recently, I've seen one in Hughes, I've seen one in Wentworth. There's important community engagement and involvement, and you were a member of Voices for Indi and part of the group that was trying to find a candidate to run as an independent in the seat. And I noticed that one of the chapters in your book is called Someone Has to Do It. So can you shine a light on us, for us, how you went from being part of that group to actually making the decision to stand? What was it that drove that decision?
So good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming in such big numbers. And I see quite a few of my friends as part of the group tonight. So welcome to other people from Indi as well. And I look forward to your contribution, Susan and Di and Ruth, as we get underway. But I suppose the singular most important thing, there were two parallel important things that happened in that decision. One is that things were not good in Indi. There was a general sense that our representation wasn't up to scratch. And a number of things led a group of us together to complain publicly that we weren't happy. So it's a really important thing, I think, to know that to start. It wasn't that everything was going swimmingly in Indi. There was a level of dissatisfaction with our current situation. And I was certainly part of that. Our Member of Parliament had absenteed herself from the Kevin Rudd apology to the Stolen Generations. And that was a particular issue for me, but there were others. And at the same time, there was a group of young people who'd grown up in Northeast Victoria, who'd gone to Melbourne. And I tell the story in the book how they came together and they were talking about they weren't going to come and live at home. They were going to go and live in Berlin or New York or Washington. And when they told me that, I was really disappointed, because I want to live in a community with young people. And they put the call out to me, basically, to say, well, you need to step up. And it's what I call the tap on the shoulder. So two things align. One is my community saw that I had potential, and two, there was a situation that looked a bit hopeful. And over 6 months, it didn't happen at once. I came to the realisation, after asking a lot of other people would they stand, because clearly I already had a good life. I didn't want to do it, but clearly someone had to do something. And in the end, I thought, well, if it's going to be me, because there was no one else who wanted to do it. And I thought I probably did have the skills and the team leadership that we could give this a good crack. At no stage did I think we were going to win. So that also helped me, because I thought, well, we can get underway with this and then I can go back to my life. I wasn't signing my life away. So the tap on the shoulder, a situation that called for change, and also the right people gathering around me, that I had a team that I thought we could do this together.
Yeah, well, we're going to touch on a couple of those points there, and there is an alignment that happens in a lot of these decisions, obviously, but you're not an accidental leader, Cathy, are you? So you've run your own business, you've been a teacher in the past, you've established associations. So how did your lived experience to that point give you the skills and the confidence to step forward?
So it's really true that I'm not an accidental leader. I was an accidental politician. And I decided that where I was going to take my leadership was in agriculture, because that's my field. And not only am I a farmer, I've got my master's degree from the University of Western Sydney in agriculture and rural development. And it's where I'd been working with women in leadership in agriculture. So that was my playground. And I'd been really active in agri-politics, not national politics. So I'd been the president of Australian Women in Agriculture. I'd been a founding member of that organisation and worked up through the ranks over 10 years. I'd been involved in agricultural politics like the Victorian Farmers Federation and the National Farmers Federation. So I had played in national politics, but from the position of agriculture and the position of being president of an organisation. And I want to talk about that as that really, I learned so many skills in that, which was my voluntary work. I had paid business, but it was in my voluntary work as president of Australian Women in Ag and my lobbying that I learnt so much. And I built up the networks and I got the skills, and I had networks Australia-wide. And one of the things that happened very early in the piece, and I want to share this story with you about being an accidental politician, but not an accidental leader. In my early days with Women in Agriculture, someone said to me, and I remember this really clearly, they said, Cathy, your enthusiasm is greater than your skills. And they sort of meant it as a compliment. But I didn't land like a compliment. I thought, oh my God, really? They can see through me. I'm a fraud. I'm getting away with all my excitement and my energy, but I haven't got the skills to underpin it. And as often happens in your life, that sort of comment lands, and it's true. And I decided to act on it. Like, I didn't say, oh no, I'm going to go into my hole and never come out again. I thought, I need to get the skills. So at that stage, I went and did the course, which was called the Australian Rural Leadership Program. And that took what I would call a rough diamond, which was me, and polished me up. It taught me about dressing. It taught me about networking. It taught me about working with men in a sophisticated way. It gave me confidence. And it also taught me the difference between being a busy leader and being an effective leader. And then I moved into the next 5 or 10 years after that. I grew into my power, if you want, of effectiveness. And I started to study, well, what does being effective look like, as opposed to being really busy, spending your time being a leader who creates a lot of noise, as opposed to actually getting things done. And so I suppose by the time I was ready to stand as a politician, I was 60, and I understood effectiveness, and I'd been practicing it for 10, 15 years. So I was ready to give it a go and see if I could actually be an effective member of parliament, like I'd been an effective president for Australian Women in Ag, like I'd been an effective businesswoman.
Oh, Cathy, so much is resonating with me there. And, the course you did touches on a lot of the courses that we do as well, in terms of leadership and skills and understanding effectiveness, not being busy, being productive, so And there's so many women on this call that have those skills or are acquiring those skills already, or women I see out in our community that are running community campaigns and are looking out for people around them and managing massive P&Ls and establishing businesses. But given the tap on the shoulder, their automatic knee-jerk reaction will be, oh, I can't do that. I don't have the skills for that. But it's fascinating because they have 9/10 of the skills often. So, together, you and I feel we're going to help bridge that 1/10 gap. But it's not just about your skills either. Like, it's part of that community campaign that was happening in Indi, I'm sure, was also sourcing campaign skill sets for your campaign team. So tell us, besides the magnificent Ruth McGowan, who was key to your campaign, who else, how else were you identifying skill sets to use on your campaign?
So there was two levels that this, probably three, but let's talk about two main levels that this happened. There was the initial group of people who had the enthusiasm and the confidence that we could actually make Indi marginal if we got together. And I noticed Susan Benedicus here, she was one of those people. And they, I have to say, were all professional people living in the electorate. So that already in their professional lives, they were well respected and they had achieved things. So that the team of 12 who came together initially were all new stuff. They knew how to organise and they knew how to live in community. So that was the first group. And I can talk about their skills in a bit. But that wasn't the primary set of skills that worked for us. What actually worked for us was when we got underway with the campaign, we had a call out to volunteers who wanted to be part of it. And here's, I think, what we did that really, really worked. We brainstormed the list of jobs that needed to be done, and that was infinite. So that anybody who said that they wanted to help, we could give them a job. So no one went away thinking, oh, there's no place for me. And I want to talk about this a little bit because that was how we built community, because lots of people who volunteered hadn't known each other. So, and I'm only going to talk about two things that we did with work, but in the book there's a whole lot more. But two things that we did that worked. One was we created hubs. And I'll just talk a little bit about a hub. A hub was a shop front, or if you know it, like a community house. So we rented space. And in the first elections, we had, I think, 4 main hubs, one in each of the main towns. And they were managed by really clever, and they all were women. And these were mature women who actually understood community. Now, they could have been a bloke if we'd found them, but actually these were colleagues of mine whom I'd worked with in another life. And I rang them up and said, look, I know it's a big ask, but would you be the community coordinator of the Wodonga hub? And eventually they all said yes. And they grew into the job because at the start we didn't know what the job was. But so we had 4 good women coordinators and those hubs became communities. And then their job was to be the front face of Cathy McGowan campaign. And then people would come in and say, well, look, I like the idea. What can I do? I'm really scared. I don't, I'm an introvert. I don't want to go outside. And the hub coordinator would say, well, that's perfect. We're running a community kitchen here. Would you like to work in the kitchen? Every Friday afternoon, we're putting on dinner. You can help with making scones, tomato soup, except it was pumpkin soup because our colour was orange. And there was a job for them. And other people came in and said, I've just got a bit of, I can give you an hour a week. And they said, we said, that's perfect. Every Wednesday afternoon, we've got a group of people, we call them the Indi makers. And the Indi makers made things. So what did they make? They made banners and bunting and dog coats and stuff. So after a while, in these community hubs, there'd be 8 and 9 women working inside with their sewing machines, cutting and pasting and making merchandise for sale. And they became this most fantastic network of women just all working away, and people would come in off the streets and you can cut up, and so there were jobs for them. And out the back, at the same time, the blokes brought in their electric saws, and they started making A-frames that we could attach the core flutes to. So these hubs became community activity. And so can you imagine that? So that worked. And then linked to it, one of the things we needed to do was have people door knock. And door knocking was not a popular activity. So what we said to the people, we'll run some training for you on door knocking. We ran lots of training, but let's just talk about door knocking. And people said, oh, I don't want to door knock. Well, we ran the training on a Friday afternoon. We put on tea, soup or whatever, and we role played the idea of door knocking. And people said, well, I'm still too scared. I don't want to go by myself. And we said, well, we'll make sure you're always in a team. So we got a roster set up, and we got handmade orange bags with stuff in it. And people would big map on the wall, and we'd map out parts of Wodonga where people would go door knocking. And so every Saturday morning for a couple of hours, we'd door knock. But everybody had to actually do the training before they could go door knocking. So we built up this skill base. And once people felt confident with the training for the door knocking, they said, oh, that was not hard at all. I could do training now for how to vote cards. So we ran training on how to vote cards. So what I'm saying in summary is we were able to provide training for the community in a very friendly, community building way where people could find a space for their own skills. And in the process, they did something which was fundamental to our campaign, was we had fun. So these communities, and in the end, in 2013, we actually had a group of people said, well, we sing. Can we have a choir? So we actually had a choir that would walk up and down the main street on a Friday night. We'd be flying our orange flags. Kids would be involved, Hare Krishna type stuff. And it was just fantastic. And people would go, oh my God, look at that group. So we weren't your traditional campaigners. And we helped people get the skills that they needed. And the third thing that we did, and it's really tricky here, is we helped people. One of our conditions was you had to be your best self, and you weren't allowed to say nasty things about anybody. And I don't know if you can begin to think how hard that was when you've got an unpopular member of parliament. Everybody wanted to talk about her and how bad she was. So what we did was we would train people, or in fact run a workshop, like verbal karate. When someone says this, rather than answering, oh yes, she's horrible, you go, oh yes, but have you seen Cathy? And we taught them how to turn the conversation around, and Cathy's going to do something about the trains. And so not get sucked in to being less than your best self. So we actually taught people how to do that. And I think that was one of the shining things that we did, is that there was enough educators on our team, enough community educators, that we could actually create the skills in the community that we needed to do the campaigning that we wanted, rather than rely on stuff that wasn't there.
Yeah, you were doing things differently, exactly the byline of your book, and it creates a fervour in an electorate. It creates longevity in terms of support, an amazing sense of purpose, and what was formerly, tagged as possibly a disengaged electorate is now highly engaged.
Can I say something about that? One of the things that we worked out really early is we were so task focused. There was nothing accidental really. We knew that there was 100,000 voters in the electorate, and we knew two things. One is we had to bring Sophie Mirabella's vote down below 50%, so that would bring in the preference count. And we also knew that we needed at least 25,000 first preference votes to get the numbers. So we had a really clear target. Susan Benedike, you're going to remember this. The target was we needed 1 in 4 votes. So that became our mantra. And we said to people, even if you don't want to come into the hub and work, can you go and have a conversation with your friends, your family, your neighbours? And we want 1 in every 4 people you know. We don't need everybody. If people don't care, leave them go. But we need 1 in 4. And in fact, that number worked out. We got 1 in 4 votes, which got us the preference flow, which got us over the line. And I think having a very specific target that your community can do and making it simple for people, like be your best self, and we need running for votes, really help the community with what and then they could go and work out how best to do that.
Oh, look, it makes the goal so much more attainable, and a complex system more understandable in many ways as well. And that's part of what we're always trying to do in our workshops too. How do preferences work? How do you do the maths on your electorate? And I see people writing as you're talking, Cathy, writing down for their own local community groups, I suspect, about, okay, implement training, door knocking training. Okay, now I'm going to move to some things you discuss in the book about 2013. You have been elected now. You are the only, you're the first female independent ever into Parliament. You're the only female sitting on the crossbench. But when you leave Parliament, there's 4 women on the crossbench. And I remember fabulous photos in 2018 of you and Rebecca Sharkey walking around the chamber in Parliament House holding the poster, "Don't get mad, get elected," and that was one of the inspiring pieces for me as well. But it seemed like a fabulous sisterhood, a collegiate atmosphere was really forming between the women on that crossbench. Can you describe that for us a little bit, that journey from being 1 to then 4?
Look, I can, and I want to talk about the sisterhood because it was true. But I also want to say it didn't just happen. We worked at it. So, for example, when Nick Xenothon was doing his work in South Australia, he talked to me and he said, "Can you teach us some of the stuff you've learned?" And again, Susan Benedict's here. Susan went across to South Australia and gave a class to Nick Xenothon's community candidates that were running. And one of those was Rebecca Sharkey. So Rebecca took notes of everything that Susan said and then went and did it. So when she got to Parliament, she already knew who we were and what we did, so that we had a natural place to start. And we grew that relationship. So that was Rebecca and I, and we worked closely together. I was able to mentor her in her first year. And then she actually mentored Helen Haynes and others as it moved on. So that making the sisterhood work and not setting yourself up in competition, we competed on some things, but we knew we were together, that I had her back and she had my back. And then when Karen Phelps made that momentous decision in 2018 to run, both Rebecca and I got on the phone separately and we rang Karen and we said, "Here's what we know." And both of us had long conversations about running as an independent. So before she'd even got there, we said, "Here's some of the stuff you need to know and here's some of the lines we use." And then both Rebecca and I went independently and spent time with her in her electorate. So I'm sorry, there was other good candidates there as well.
I remember.
So we did that. And so the relationship was already there. And then we said to her that if you get elected, we want to walk down the aisle with you. So we're there from the very beginning. And we did do that. And then I was able to give her the manual that my office had put together. And I'm very happy to share it with the office. It was policy and procedure manual for how to run your business. So when she arrived, we gave her that, so she didn't have to go through and do all that horrible admin work from start. So that worked. And then as it was moving on, we knew Julia Banks, who was a Liberal, was just under such pressure from her team that when she decided to come across, we said, "We will look after you. We will provide a safe place for you." And we did, which meant we could mind her back, which meant that, for example, at that stage, the balance of power was in my direction. And when I would be meeting with the Prime Minister or meeting with Liberals, I would be up front and say to them, "You leave Julia alone. We know you don't like what she's done, but if you attack her," which they never publicly came out and attacked. They did underlying things, but I reckon it was Rebecca and I had a lot to do with saying to the government, you treat her well. She's made a decision, you mightn't like it, but you've got to respect the decision. But also we gave her a safe place and shared our knowledge and information with her as well. So I think that's part of us being women together, is that you have to have worked that out before you get into politics. that you're not actually going to backstab women, regardless of their politics, and that you will be supportive of them. And that means you have to have worked out how to work in a competitive space in a respectful way. And I have to say, I did it with all the women members of parliament that I came across. When they made, first speeches, I'd send them flowers, regardless of, what colour they were.
Oh, fantastic.
When things happened that were really difficult, I'd ring them up and say, can we get together and have a drink? So we were the change that we wanted to see. And it's easy to do. You just got to get out of your own way to do it. And it just builds such goodwill in Parliament. If people know that you're not going to, I called it sticking to my knitting. And Ruth, my sister, said, well, what does that mean? Well, it means I stayed on track. I didn't interfere with other people's. I was always a good country woman, and I was fundamentally there to represent my community. I wasn't there to make enemies, and I wasn't there to play competition between the Liberal and the National Party or anybody else. I was always going to represent my electorate. So I was really clear of how I was going to do my job and what it meant. And I didn't get sidetracked by playing petty politics or personality politics. And I'd be saying to all of you, you all know that, but it gets really tempting when you're there to get sucked into the void and just say something nasty, or people want to gossip. You just got to be careful you don't fall into that trap.
Oh, I feel like this is going to parlay well into our US discussion shortly, Cathy, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole just yet. I've got 2 more questions, and then so start getting your questions in the chat, everyone. Look, we're kicking off a campaign called Looks Like a Politician, Cathy, and we're sending out a letter to all the female politicians in Australia, federal, state, local, to send us a photo of themselves out in their electorate, just holding a pledge board that says looks like a politician. And the whole idea is to normalise how we view the political job. Time spent in Canberra versus time spent in your electorate. And so many politicians, yourself included, no doubt, do things that I do as a head of a PNC frequently. Maybe it's helping at a fundraiser, handing out awards at a school. So tell us, what was the percentage of your time spent in Canberra versus in your electorate? And what was your favourite thing about being out and about in the electorate?
Before I do that, can I just do an ad for the book? Hey, who would have thought that this 20-year-old looks like a politician?
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
Beautiful, yes. Accidental politician.
The job, in my mind, I divided the job up into 3 main categories. There was Canberra, there was constituent work, and then there was what I call getting out and about. So Canberra meant travelling to Canberra and voting. And briefly, that meant for 20 weeks of the year, on the Sunday afternoon, I'd hop in my car at 2 o'clock. I'd drive to Canberra, where I lived in a shared house. A good woman, Rosemary Cassidy, let me have my own room there with a bath, and I kept my clothes in the wardrobe there. So I'd turn up on a Sunday afternoon and have tea with Rosemary, get organised, and we'd start Monday at 7 o'clock in the morning and work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. At 5 o'clock on Thursday, I'd hop in my car, drive home, get home about 9:30, get organised, and then, so that was Canberra. And I'm happy to talk more about Canberra, but it was a job in Canberra. It wasn't my life. Then I'd come home Friday morning, get home, and I live on a farm, so I'd usually have a quick walk around the farm and the garden just to say, hello, everybody, I'm here. First thing on Friday morning, I'd hold a press conference in Albury-Wodonga, and we'd get the 3 TV stations together, the 3 or 4 radio stations and the newspapers. They'd, without fail, the Friday after a sitting week. So that means I had to get up early, fluff my hair up, do my makeup, turn up, and I did that press conference without fail. And the media loved it, I loved it, and it got me right into the living room of almost every one of my constituents on a regular basis. So that was and they were all fascinated, what had I done that week? So that was the Canberra side, and I'm happy to talk more about it. And then I did the constituent work. So if there's 100,000 people in the electorate, in my final year as a Member of Parliament, I was there for 6 years, my staff opened up 15,000 new files. So that's 15,000 people with new cases who walked into my office who wanted me as their representative to do the job for them. And I have to say, that part of the job I think is totally under talked about as a politician. But that's what got me votes. That's what built my credibility. That's what built me love and affection in the community. And the thing about it was I was really good at that because I'd run my own business. I'd run my own business, so I knew about customer service, I knew about time management, I knew about staff, I knew about not over-servicing, I knew about keeping records, I knew about having tight turnaround frameworks, I knew about how to do a letter, I knew about how to run an office, basically. So incredibly important. And I have to say, not many colleagues in Parliament had that skill. Most of them employ women to be their office manager, but they're not really good at the constituent stuff. I loved it and I was good at it. And in the third part of my job, so basically during that week, I do that all Friday. And in the weeks Parliament wasn't sitting, I'd spend 2 days a week on office work, a lot. And then the other part of the job was what I call getting out and about. So I'd go to the opening of a handkerchief, as Rebecca Sharkey and I said. We would turn up, but clearly there were too many invitations and I couldn't go to everything. So I had a big matrix put up on my wall. Up the top, down the side, I have every single community in my electorate. And across the top, I had the issues, aged care, sporting groups, young people, schools, probably 50 issues across the top. And so when an invitation came in, my staff would check the matrix. Had I already been to that town? Yes, well, I probably wouldn't go again in a hurry. Had I already done that topic? Yes, but somewhere else. So that helped me work out how I could cover my whole electorate in a year, going to different places and talking about different topics. And for the groups that I couldn't go and see, we had this other lovely thing happen in our office. Remember I talked about the makers? Well, the makers wanted to keep meeting after the election. They didn't want to stop because they loved coming together. So I asked the makers if they would make hampers. And I put maybe $70 to $100 for each hamper. And they would gather Indi stuff together and make it into a lovely hamper. And then we would give those hampers to groups where I couldn't go and actually be present. Now, not all the groups, of course, but for many, many of them, they'd all get a hamper with a little card in it from me saying, I'm really sorry I can't be there. Could you please read this message out? And I hope you can raffle this hamper and use the money for something that you're doing. So that was basically the job. And then surrounding all that, I had staff who helped me, and I had fantastic communications people who, for example, would put an ad in the paper saying, you know, Cathy's going to be in such and such a town on Saturday, come and say hello. So the ad would be on the paper, it would be on social media. And then I referred to those hubs before. We'd also send a message out to all the people who came to the hub saying, you know, Cathy's going to be in Mansfield. If you want to go and see her, come and say hello, and I'll be there. So the locals were there and they'd talk to each other while they were waiting to see me. So we kept that community enthusiasm bubbling along.
Again, being out in the constituent, I mean, these are the research that comes back time and time again about women being more visible in their electorates, taking more constituent meetings and representing those constituent views back into the chamber at a higher frequency. I hear it time and time again. You've just said you loved it as well. It sounds like the most energizing part about what you were doing. And, you know, I feel the same way. So do so many people on this call. That's the bit that we love, being out in our community.
Oh, but I loved doing it. And then I loved standing up in Parliament, making a speech about it. I loved that. And then I'd get a copy of the speech and I'd send it to all the people I'd meet. So if I'd gone down to Mansfield and I'd gone to the races or the art show or whatever it was, and then I'd make a speech about it in Parliament, then I'd send them all a copy. And if I could, I'd mention their names in it. And that would go back to the president of the racing club, who would then read it out at the racing club meeting, that I'd actually made a speech about Mansfield Racing Club in Parliament. Yeah. So it wasn't just the doing of it, it was getting the circle to work so that they knew I was representing them. So I'd make Parliament work for me. I didn't just play Parliament for the fun of it, I actually made it work for Indi.
Yeah, it's a positive feedback loop, isn't it? We can see how it worked, and then how you managed to help others replicate it as well. Yeah. So one more question from me, and I just so get your questions in the chat, everyone. Then I'll be getting you to take off your mic so you can ask the question personally to Cathy. I've heard you speak before, Cathy, and you've mentioned it in the book as well, about being able to, people in your electorate having the opportunity to go to Canberra and volunteer with you and be part of the democratic process. It was so well received and taken up by people in your community. Can you share that a bit as to how that came about?
I can, and I think Sharon's here as well, and Susan might make some points about it, but it grew out of those hubs. I was trying to describe what fun the hubs were and how busy they were and how so much work got done by everybody, you know, that busy bee, that cross-pollination. And I knew that this learning thing was so important, but very few people actually understood how politics worked, and there was cynicism was just huge. So I thought, well, if people can come to Canberra and work in my office, they'll see how I work, and I'm not cynical. I actually believe in democracy, and we can teach them how to get things done through a Members of Parliament office. So that's sort of how it grew. At first, it was very shaky. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we got a lot of feedback from people. And over the time, we developed a really good program. We would do a really good induction. We'd organise billets for people, so anybody who wanted to could come. They could stay for $5 a night with somebody in Canberra. But the thing that I found that made the difference was if I paid attention to it. I found that if people came to Canberra and I didn't look after them, if I just delegated them to a staff, it didn't work. But if I met them in the morning and night and talked to them about what they were doing and got that, I could then hand them over to a staff to manage, but it had to be a connection with me. And initially I was really reluctant to do that because I don't even think you can begin to imagine how time poor I was when I was in Canberra. There's so much I wanted to do. The thought of actually putting time into volunteers, I thought, how can I do this? And then someone helped me realise that this was the most effective, you know how I talked about being an effective leader? This was the most effective half an hour of a day, because you got to talk directly to one of your constituents, and they would go back home and talk to everybody else. And not only that, by talking to me, I would explain to them why I wasn't cynical. I explained to them how I was going about getting things done. And they go, oh my God, could I do that? And I'd say, absolutely, you could do that. So if you go home and you get a group organised, then the whole group can come up to Parliament. And there was just one story I'll finish on. So there were some young people, and I particularly targeted young people to come. There were two young people who were on the Wangaratta Council, and they wanted a mental, what do you call it, the mental health headspace in Wangaratta. Yep. So first off, we got two of them to come as volunteers, and they were counsellors, and they came, and Di Thomas, who's here, she was my chief of staff. Di organised for them to meet with the staff of Mr Hunt, who was the Minister for Health, because Mr Hunt wasn't going to meet me, but he would meet with counsellors from Wangaratta. So Di organised that. They told him the whole story, and he said, well, that's fantastic. If you come back again, do all your costings and come back with a deputation, I'll meet with you. So 2 or 3 weeks later, they got a whole deputation together, mental health, local hospital, counsellors, everybody you'd possibly need. They had a program, I think it was $4 million. They went to see Mr Hunt, and he says, yep, no trouble, I'll do that. But the secret, so he wasn't going to ever give it to me. Yeah, but that didn't matter. I didn't mind. They'd learned how to do it. And in the end, when the announcement was made, the government have a funny thing. They have what they call duty senators. So in Northeast Victoria, the National Party duty senator is Bridget McKenzie, and the Liberal Party senator is someone tell me, I should know who she is.
Jane Hume.
Jane Hume, that's right. Anyhow, when the announcement came, it was Bridget McKenzie who actually made the announcement in Wangaratta, and everybody was there. And they didn't actually tell me that she didn't tell me she was going to do it. But the two young people rang up and said, hey, Cathy, get down to Mirror Park on Saturday because we're going to have the announcement. And so I was there at their invitation, and I was absolutely charming. I resisted the temptation to make any fuss about it, but I made sure I spoke to the media and said, here's how this money came about. It was these young people came to Canberra on the volunteer program. They did all the work. They need to be congratulated. And that was the story that the media ran. And you can just see how powerful that was. So it took away the light from both the politicians and put it where it needed to be on these two young candidates who are both in local government. So the volunteer program worked out superbly like that as another learning activity. Anyhow, I better stop.
No. Oh, look, we want to hear more because it's so inspiring to hear these stories and hear how the engagement has increased, and to see how there's been outcomes as a consequence of that is very inspiring. And that's why we wanted to have you here tonight. That's why we want everyone to grab the book, because it is a handbook on how to make this happen. And it includes so many inspiring stories as well. And we haven't finished just yet, Cathy, because I'm going to throw to some questions. So, and you're going to get some questions from people who have done our course, who are going to ask you some technical questions. The first one's from Dominique.
Oh, I should be paying attention then. Thank you, Cathy. Thank you. I think we'll have to have a part 2, Licia. So maybe next week, same time, same place. I'll just start by saying I'm in Craig Kelly's electorate, so enough said. My question's around preferences, actually. I'm just curious, to run as an independent, did you end up having a list of preferences, or did you run with an open ticket? Like, I'm just curious, because Sophie was quite a high profile Lib, enough said, I won't say anymore. I was just interested how you did it.
And I'm happy to talk about that, but I also I know some of you know Ruth's book, It's Get Elected, and that's really worth reading as well, because this topic of preferences is a bit complicated. So we ran an open ticket and we got advice from Tony Windsor. We said, Tony, what do we do? Because our team didn't know what to do. And Tony said, you explain to people that as long as they vote 1 for Cathy, they can work out what they're going to do after that. So that's what we actually did. But it's much, much more subtle than that. We didn't actually just do that. We had a strategy, because we knew to get these votes, you know how I said we needed 1 in 4 votes? We needed a big group of people who were particularly dissatisfied to give us their vote. There wasn't enough of us. And we did the analysis in the electorate, and we looked at all the numbers, and we found out the group that was particularly unhappy were a group of National Party voters. And the National Party voters were particularly unhappy because there's a deal done in Victoria, and I think in other states, between the Nationals and the Libs. And you know what that is? That if the Libs are running, you can't run a Nat. So that's the deal. So the poor old National Party voters had to vote for a Liberal who they didn't like. And they were really cross about that. And they didn't like the Liberal personally, they didn't like the Liberal Party, and they didn't like the deal. So we thought, well, how do we get all those people, those dissatisfied sections of the electorate, to give me their number 1 vote? And they can give the number 2 vote to the Liberal, but they can put in a vote to express their dissatisfaction. So while it's true I didn't allocate preferences, I made sure that I got those National Party preferences and kept them. And it happened in 2016 when the Nats actually ran a candidate themselves. I said, okay, we'll put Nat 1, but put Cathy 2 and put the Libs 3rd. So that way I'd get them. And I said the same thing to the Libs, whatever. But the secret ingredient with all of this, and this is what I mean, it's subtle, and you can never be naive about thinking you're going to win a seat, was one of the people on my team in the beginning, one of the 12, was really politically astute, and he understood this. And he said, there's a key National Party influencer. His name is Ken Jasper. He'd been a state member of Parliament. We've got to get him to come out and say, Cathy's the girl. I'm backing her. So he did. And him saying that publicly swung 15,000, 20,000 votes not quite that much, but in my direction, whereas they should have gone on the party ticket to the Liberal Party. So it's a complicated answer. And I just want to finish off. I watched what happened in the Mallee seat at the last election. It was up for grabs, and there was at least 3, but many more independents running. Between them, they got 21,000 votes. But they weren't able to do the strategy to make sure that they all preferenced each other without actually preferencing on the how to vote card. So their preferences went every which way. And in fact, the Liberal Party almost won. But in fact, the Nats won again on Liberal Party preferences. And that 21,000 votes, all those guys' preferences just wobbled out. So you don't actually have to do it on the how to vote card, but you actually have to do it word of mouth, that vote 1 Cathy and put your next vote 2nd or 3rd. But so few people actually understand preferences that in 2019, I ended up running workshops on preferences as my way of saying to everybody, you've got to put Helen Haynes first, then you've got to do 2 and 3 after that. But lots of people thought they would vote Greens first. And I said, no, that's not going to work. So preferences is a really, really important thing to understand and have a strategy about, because if you don't win the preferences, you can't get in as an independent.
Yeah. Thank you, Dominique, because and it is like a dark art, and we spend a lot of time on preferences with Ruth in our online equip process for exactly that reason. In fact, we're going to launch some specific masterclasses next year on preferences because of this. 90% of politicians in Australia get elected on preferences. You need to know how they work. Dilnaz, your question about an aha moment.
Hi, Cathy. Thanks for all this, and thanks to all of you. I was a last-minute add-on onto this event, so thank you for that. I just wanted to ask Cathy, all other questions seem redundant because you've talked of strategy, system, community, collegiality, everything. Was there one kind of moment that you thought you used a skill well, but more so a new skill that you picked up along the way? Not something from leadership, not something from running a business, but something new that you picked up and boom, put it into action?
That is such a good question. Yes, but it's not so much a skill, it's much more a characteristic. And it's a little bit of a story. When I've been working as women in ag, I was always trying to change the system. It was a patriarchy, and I was trying to get them to listen to women. And there's a woman called Sarah Henderson who wrote a whole series of books about the light at the end of the tunnel. And I met her once, and I said to her, how do you do it? And she said, work with men. And she said, I don't bother about them. She said, my competitive advantage is that I'm a woman. And she said, I don't actually compete with blokes. And I remember at the time thinking, oh, well, that's absolutely ridiculous. She doesn't understand power. And I ignored it. When I got to Parliament, I was thinking, well, how can I make my way here? I'm a country woman and I don't really belong in Parliament, and I'm a farmer and I don't really belong, and I'm old. I don't really belong here. And then I remembered what Sarah Henderson had said about my competitive advantage being a woman. And I thought, my competitive advantage in Parliament is I'm the only one of me here. I'm the only country woman who gets agriculture, who gets community, who's an independent, who's run her own business. And once I settled into that, I made that my strategic advantage. And I hadn't appreciated the power of it, but I'll just tell you another quick story about it. Was that one of my friends gave me, orange was our colour, and one of my friends gave me an orange tea set, a beautiful teapot, little orange, beautiful orange jug and coffee cups as a congratulations for winning the electorate. And I took it to Parliament and it sat in the cupboard for a little bit. And then another friend one day, she gave me she made a homemade fruit, towards Christmas time in 2013. She baked a homemade fruitcake for me. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll put on morning tea. And I said, well, who do I need to get on well with in Parliament? And I thought of my immediate political neighbours. So the people whose electorates are next door to mine. So I sent out a really nice little card, come for Christmas, cup of tea and homemade fruitcake to my office over next week, and we can get to know each other. Now, if I had about 8, maybe 10 neighbours around in terms of electorates, and 5 of them came. And we sat down in my office and we had the most wonderful discussion about the job of being a member of parliament, not the politics. And we ate fruitcake and we drank cups of tea. And I said to myself, aha, I now get this. I didn't understand it, but my competitive advantage is not only I'm a woman, but I'm a country woman who knows hospitality. And then that went so well that I was talking to my staff about how hungry people were for community and getting to know each other, and we didn't do it. So what my staff and I came up with in the winter of the next year, 2014, we thought we'd host a winter soiree. Why not? So we invited people to come to my office for Millowit cheese and Rutherglen muscat and homemade fruitcake. And invited just maybe 50 people, anybody that we'd had good relationships with. And they all came. And it was such a hoot. Somebody said, Cathy, we haven't had a party like this in Parliament ever. We used to have it in the old Parliament House, but no one else has done that. And because it went so well, and I was able to host it, and we didn't do politics, we actually did, we're all here, it was like we're all here together working. Anyhow, that mid-year 2014 went so well that come Christmas time, my colleagues on the crossbench, Andrew Wilkie, Adam Bant, Bob Catter, said, why don't we host it together? And we call it a crossbench Christmas party. And so we all sent out our invitations. And so every year, every time, just using my office as a base, we hosted, Clive Palmer was part of it too, we hosted the crossbench Christmas party. And Diane, when we finished, and Ruth, you would know about this, the last one of my year, we had over 250 people in the corridors celebrating Christmas, and it was everybody came, including the Prime Minister would turn up, the Leader of the Opposition would turn up, the Speaker would turn up, and it built community in the place. So that's what I learned, and it's what I so fundamentally know that we as women, if you can be comfortable as a woman and not complete with the blokes, ignore the blokes, they don't know any of the stuff that we know, and if we play to our strengths, there's nothing that we can't do. And they can't take that power. No one could take that away from me. And it made me one of the most popular members of Parliament. They were really sad to see me go, but they've kept on that tradition of the crossbench Christmas party because it's so effective.
These are such inspiring stories. I can see in the chat people saying, oh, I needed to hear this after today. And it's bringing some hope back into after a tough 12 hours. So I really want to get to the next few questions. So they might have to be brief answers, Cathy. But Billy, can you ask your question? It's a great one.
Walton. Thank you, Cathy. Lovely to hear from you. I was really interested in pulling on that thread of cynicism about democracy that you found in Indi, and I was wondering, particularly for young people, what you saw were the primary causes of that and what you did. You spoke a little bit about the Volunteers to Canberra program, but what other things did you try and do to address that disconnect?
And I might ask Ruth and Di and Sue to add to this, but young people, they're really pissed off because no one ever listens to them. In Indi, there's no young Labor, there's no young farmers, there's no young anything. So I listened to them and I promised them that I would give them preferential treatment. So if there were 2 competing ideas, I opted for the young person's perspective. And it also meant that I went out of my way to make sure I got the young people's voice. And every year we would do a survey on the budget and how people reacted to it. So I would host young people's breakfasts in each of the main towns. So between 7 o'clock and 9 o'clock before school, I'd buy breakfast, invite the school captains and anybody else to come along. But 15 to 20 people would usually turn up, and across 4 or 5 towns. So those who were politically interested could talk about what they thought about the budget, and then we'd put them on our database and we would actually work very closely with them. But they became a primary group for me, and I went out of my way. So if I was in a group of adults, if I was in a mixed group where people were talking to me, I'd always talk to the young people first. I'd get eye contact with everybody, and then I'd go across and shake the hand of the young woman. I would always give her preference. Hello, Sally, what brings you here? So I'd talk to her before I'd talk to the blokes or the older people. And the young people knew I saw them and they knew I cared. And I'd always make sure at the end of it to go back and say, hey, Sally, lovely seeing you. Here's my card, get back in touch with me. So I made a point of finding them and connecting them and then putting them on my database so that I could find them again.
Fabulous. I love the idea of giving them preferential treatment. I think it's fantastic. Now, Linda, great question about strategies being applied to other levels of government. Over to you. Oh, you're on mute. Whoop.
That always happens. Sorry. I've been working for a long time trying to get women to think about that local councils are theirs and they can claim their space. And Bruce and Dilnaz are here and they know exactly what I'm talking about, and there may be some other people as well. And I'm just wondering, all this is so great. It is really community development 101 plus, 100%, 150%. And I'm just wondering if you know of any other spheres of government, especially local, where the INDI strategies have actually been tried, or, that's the question.
The answer is no, and I personally pay no attention to anybody else. It's 150% of my job is to do INDI, and has been to get Helen Haynes re-elected. So that's a little bit what I mean about sticking to my knitting. But I think Ruth might have something to say. Ruth?
It's great to see Strathbogie today, that there 4 out of 7 councillors there are women, and it's one of the INDI shires, and I reckon there's something in the water of INDI. So you've been the change and the role model, Cathy, that those 8 LGAs in INDI are looking at. And the community, the community activism has taken a leaf out of your book, and Strathbogie's got 4 out of 7. And young Ash Fitzpatrick was one of those youth councillors on Wang Council, and she ran for council and was the youngest councillor elected at 19. So I think you've been the role model at that federal leadership level, has lifted up local government, women's aspirations in local government.
I think it's more than that too. Sorry if I can just step in, it's Di Thomas here. I also think that connection with local government is really important, because it reinforces that value of local government as well. And so young women see that, and there are plenty of examples, as you've said, Ruth, in INDI, of young women getting involved and making the link to Cathy, and then it improves their understanding of how the levels of government work and how they can work with the federal government.
And I'll just add my 2 penneth as well. Seema Abdullah, who has been the current mayor, or was the mayor of Shepparton, ran an extraordinary campaign that is very much based on these principles. The person who works beside her really closely, her dear friend, was also one of the key people on Susanna Sheed's election campaign. So there is a DNA that runs through. Once you get community, once you get how to embrace volunteers and take all of those ideas and move together, then you get great results. And I think that was the best one that I saw when I was looking around the local government elections in Victoria.
Thank you. Thank you for contributing to all of those. I know, whether they're federal, state or local, the community engagement that we're witnessing lifting is extraordinary, and it's inspiring, and it keeps people like myself and Women for Election going. Cathy and I were talking just before we let everyone in from the waiting room. We're saying, well, nothing is happening now in Australian politics that wasn't happening 4 years ago, or wasn't happening the 4 years prior to that, or the 4 years prior to that. The difference is people are paying attention now. They're watching, they're engaging, they're looking up from their busy lives, knowing that their lives are still busy. In fact, COVID year has made them busier in so many ways, but they're not taking their gaze away from the political landscape in Australia. And that is an amazingly positive aspect of what we're doing now. You know, what empowered Cathy and Ruth and other people that have run before are currently elected. Some of you are mid-campaign right now, and people are seeing that. Women are seeing that, and it's mobilizing them more and more. And you watch in the US election, however it's going to work out in the next 24 hours, and maybe we won't know for another 3 or 4 days, people will be mobilized to get involved, and that can only be a good thing. Cathy, I have not asked you about the US elections. We almost made it past. Do you want to make one comment on what you've witnessed seeing overseas? And I know you're going to pull it back to Indi and it's not your knitting, but we'd love a comment still.
Yes. One of the reasons we won in Indi was because we didn't engage the opposition. Now, I know that's a bizarre thing to say, but we could have. We left the Liberal Party alone, we let them do their stuff, and we raised ourselves up to be an alternative that the community wanted. And we said we were going to do that, and then we actually did it. So I didn't see that in America. I saw the two parties just go hammer and tongs at the same stuff. And I kept on thinking, Joe Biden, you've got to not talk about him. Stop talking about him. Be the change you want to see. But they engaged in traditional politics. So I would say to all of you who are running campaigns, you've got to be better than your opposition. And you've got to show the community that you're actually better. And that's a really tough gig. But we're up to it, because I tell you what, the opposition's not that good. So you can do it, but you've actually got to stay in your lane. Once you've worked out how you're going to be your best self and your team's going to be your best self, and you've done the training, then you've got to stick to it and stay on the moral high ground, which means getting out of your own way all the time. Because I tell you what, you want to sink down into the mud really quickly, and you just can't do it once. You can't let it happen. So consequently, your team needs to be there to keep you on track. So you all need to sign up to this Being Your Best Self business.
Well, I think that is a fabulous way to finish up the evening. I'm refusing to get back in front of CNN tonight. I'm going to leave it with this feeling tonight. Please, everybody on the call, please give the virtual clap to Cathy tonight for joining us. Cathy, all the best with your book. Please, you've seen the link there. We'll show it one more time about how you can buy the book. We'll also provide more information in our social media and on our website as well. But learn about the positive stories and see yourself in Cathy's journey as well. We all have the skill sets to step forward, and we are here, Women for Election are here to help you do that as well. So Cathy, I look forward to our next session and all the best in the coming weeks. Have a fabulous night, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.